The webway technology will be critical to overall development and supply lines throughout the conquest region. The technology is beyond me personally, but I have attached the notes drafted by the subject matter experts in Tome W. The summary of the technology is that, through theoretically similar technology to a warp drive, a gate is temporarily forced open in space to allow one into an alternate dimension, through which distances can be shorter or longer, depending on where you choose to go. The webway, being artificially constructed, is not subject to the variable nature of the warp, allowing for much faster overall travel times if one knows the correct routes to take. Displayed now is a map of the galaxy in real space. Next to it is the map of the webway routes known to the Exodites of Sharnak. The red line on this map was the route taken by our initial voyage around the galaxy, and the time it took in between each major section of travel. As you can see, it is currently the 5th year of our voyage, and we have nearly circled the galaxy. Warp travel is inconsistent enough to potentially defeat that time, but most often in my experience, it would take more than a century to make the same journey with conventional travel. Provided is a psychic black box recording of the ship over the course of our voyage, and all evidence we have to support this claim. It should be readable with a psychic servitor unit. Please inform me if it is not, so we can work out another solution to retrieve that information. As you can surely understand, this incredible jump in travel time and consistency is absolutely vital to any conquering power. Attached is the list of dangers one might potentially find in the webway, and the full description of each. Of particular note are the urbanites eldar, who have spent much of the last 50,000 years or more indulging in every manner of perversion imaginable. It is recommended by the Exodites that you attack and kill these on sight. Fleeing is unlikely to be an option with the speeds of their ships, but everyone that you kill inflicts a massive loss to their empire, as they can no longer replenish their numbers as effectively due to the formation of what they call the Womb of Destruction, a warp vortex found here. With their inherent psychic sensitivity, the Eldar must be protected against larger warp disruptions such as this, lest their soul is Eldar children born without the protection of an Exodite world spirit or similar degree of protection are almost certainly destined to be stillborn, their souls destroyed in the womb. These are purely defensive entities and cannot be requisitioned from their interred planets for the war effort. For this reason, the primary bulk of Exodite aid shall be in the form of ships, access to the webway, the production of the psychoplastic substance known as wraithbone, and their war constructs known as wraiths. 9. Not only do many contain war machines, albeit in need of severe repair at this point, but they also contain established bloodlines of veterans who can command such. In addition, their common population will serve as adequate initial forces, given arms, armor, and basic training. These worlds in particular will be simple to draw to our banner through technical expertise in repairing their ancestral machines. Night worlds shall be key to the initial conquest and expansion, and provide the initial seed of veterancy for the armies moving forwards. After these worlds are brought into the fold, the next targets will be other worlds of similar low-risk nature in the region, such as feral worlds, feudal worlds, and lower development worlds in roughly that level of danger. Civilized, hive, and death worlds should be avoided in the first wave of conquest. Civilized and hive worlds have more potential danger to our own armies, with their higher degree of technological development, and death worlds provide little benefit without a great amount of effort to bring them up to par. Recruitment from death worlds, however, should be considered if humans are present upon such. The webway and its rapid transportation with relative safety allows us to avoid problematic worlds and focus on expansion into less contested territories. This initial expansion is planned to take 20 years, long enough for the populations conquered to naturally procreate and produce the next generation of workers. Worlds conquered should be developed in accordance with the guidelines of subsection CD3. A 1 to 5 year period of digesting this conquest should follow, making sure to establish trade lines and factories for the next wave of expansion, as well as establishing all the basic education and local governance required for the next generation to be more productive citizens. This will take away from the front line, but if enough soldiers are present from the initial recruitment period, this will be the most attractive and effective measure. If you look upon the map, it is currently labeled with all planets that we have information upon and are rated on 3 scales: estimated level of development, resource, abundance, and estimated difficulty of diplomatic integration. Furthermore, you can see the subsection under each location contains a more detailed summary and references the relevant pages in the tome. C I have provided that contains all known information. The initial conquest is planned to incorporate these highlighted worlds, roughly 2,000 in total. The initial acquisitions will be here, 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 and here. These will provide the basic troops needed to begin training in transit as we incorporate the next sections here, 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 and here. The knights from the initial worlds should be repaired by this point in the timeline, judging from worst-case scenarios based on the attached breakdown of their current status. Off. As you can see from the practical demonstration, Wraithbone is produced through a complex psychic process that I, frankly, do not understand the details behind. I have been told that it is a form of solidified psychic energy produced by a specific intonation, focus, and thought process. The volunteer Bonesinger, as they are called, was voted as distinctly average among his peers in terms of talent and ability. It took him roughly 250 years to learn bone singing to this level. The process is technically not a technology, as the Eldar are gifted enough with lifespan and inherent talent that the production through dedicated artisans is sufficient for most of their needs. They have told me that they know of no technology that can produce Wraithbone, but I'm confident that you learned men can produce such, if given the theory and the ability to question a subject matter expert. If such a technology cannot be produced, then dedicated psychic adepts with sufficient time to learn through rejuvenation treatments should be able to learn how to produce the material as well. It is a skill, not an inherent racial ability, and thus is available to anyone with a teacher, time to learn, and psychic talent. The material properties of Wraithbone are flexible, owing to their psychic construction. The shape is fully alterable by a bonesinger of sufficient skill, and as you saw, a 5-meter block was produced within a minute by an average bonesinger. This block weighs roughly as much as an equivalent block of structure-grade plasteel, but has durability and resistance to damage equivalent to adamantium. Guilliman paused for just a moment, letting the burst of binary conversation pass before continuing. In addition to this, Wraithbone is self-reinforcing. It draws from the ambient psychic energy surrounding it to repair itself over time, assuming it has not been destroyed completely. Wraithbone objects do not degrade if left unattended, and indeed will restore themselves without the need for maintenance if the damage is minimal enough. It is otherwise a non-reactive material, and does not expand beyond its original shape without explicit effort. He waited for a time, but a full minute passed, and the conversation had yet to die down. The Fabricator General thunked the butt of his halberd against the stone-tile ground, causing an immediate silence. Guilliman nodded his head in thanks and continued. I am led to believe that the Titans of each Forge world require great plates of adamantium to protect themselves. Such plates would be a task, requiring only hours for a bonesinger to produce, and much simpler to affix, thanks to their lighter weight. Thanks to their self-repairing property, only the most damaged plates would ever need active effort to repair. Assuming you only had to produce and bless the internal structure and components of a Titan, I imagine the time it would take to produce each would fall dramatically. Expanding the use of Wraithbone to simple weapons and armor plates should be able to increase the overall manufacturing output of your forges by an order of magnitude. I shall leave the exact calculations of such to ye learned men. The Bonesinger is available to produce other examples of the material at your request, should you require more samples for testing. Guilliman finished just in time for the first calculations on the potential increase in output of the tech priests to finish. He felt the distinct warmth of a task well performed as the air was filled in what he assumed was the equivalent of furious and open debating between the assembled parties. It sounded like the static of 1,000 malfunctioning Vox communicators, if he was being honest. All in all, it took 9 hours to finish his presentation and proposal to the senior tech priests of Griffon. 3 hours of presentation, 6 hours of rigorous questioning about specifics in his overall plans and available information. They then requested another 100 or so samples of the wraithbone in various sizes, and a week to consider the proposal in full, both of which were granted, and the rest of the meeting rescheduled for about 6 days from now. Before they left, Guilliman offered the sum total of the STC fragment copies he had made, thus to the tech priests, who accepted it emotionlessly. The originals and the best copy of each. He still had a personal copy of everything back on Charnak's Pride. There was a buzz in the air as they walked away, escorted by their titans. All in all, Guilliman felt rather confident in his presentation and sales pitch. Going over his plans like that in such meticulous data even pointed out 3 potential considerations that he had missed so far, which meant that even if nothing else was gained, his plans had been slightly improved by this encounter. A rigorous and productive session of double-checking his notes always left him in a good mood. His smile slowly fell into slight concern when he looked at the ones that had accompanied him. Reaching up, he rubbed the back of his neck, Petra's glare firmly on him. Asarnil's glare coming from behind her, then the slightly annoyed looks of every other Eldar behind the two of them. I suppose I forgot to warn how thorough the tech priests like to be when negotiating. He spoke, somewhat sheepishly. 9 hours! Petra started. Her glare was sharp and deep. 9 hours of standing still, in silence. You went into detail about the predicted reproductive rates of 13 variations of livestock, the products that could be harvested from each, and the considerations for their ranching on 20 subvariants of world. Asarno elaborated, his glare narrowed slightly as he continued. This information was in the tome, I thought. You could have just told him to read it. That wouldn't demonstrate my personal knowledge of the matter, Guilliman weakly explained. Knowledge is sacred to them, and increased expertise is. He decided to stop talking when he saw the looks on their faces. The escort behind Asarno was already mostly dismissed, returning to their posts and dragons being brought back to the stables. Death Fang itself decided to simply lay down in the middle of the hangar and sleep there, much to the slight panic and immense curiosity of the Barbarans still temporarily housed here. It was currently flopped over on its side, breathing with its mouth open to cool down from being in the heat so long. I could have endured such just fine had you warned me ahead of time. Asternil continued to lightly vent at him, rolling a shoulder and letting the symphony of cracks ring out. As you chose not to, you are going to be punished accordingly. Guilliman raised a brow, even as Petra turned her head and glared sharply. Asarnil continued undaunted. We are going to participate in the ancient rites of manly bonding by getting loose with a hot bath and then sparring for several hours, followed by another hot bath. We are going to talk about all manner of masculine things during this time, such as lifting heavy objects and lusting after women. Asarnil raised a finger in the air, directed at Guilliman, and brows raised in a haughty manner. Do not attempt to resist. This is my kingly decree. Guilliman snorted bemusedly and replied, Oh, woe is me, to suffer such a horrid fate. I suppose I must. Asarnil turned on the spot and raised a hand to gesture for Guilliman to follow. Come now. I shall have the maids ready the bathing chamber in promiscuous attire, with trays of fruits, wine, and whatever other overly indulgent thing I can order them to bring. Perhaps hot oils. Sarno began to walk off, Guilliman shaking his head in amusement before turning to Petra for a moment. She was glaring at him. He blinked. He supposed she was still upset from needing to stand still so long. It was wrong of him to cause that. He supposed she was also annoyed. He had no solid confirmation of a tutor yet. So far, her being present was for nothing. I apologize for making you stand still for so long. I should have remembered to warn you. He apologized, nodding his head at her. She was still glaring, apparently needing some time to forgive him. He reached up to rub the back of his neck for a moment. I'll talk to you again tonight. You're not allowed to look, she demanded sullenly. He blinked. At what? The maids. Improper, she grunted out, not looking at him directly anymore. Oh. She was worried that he would disturb the servants, as Asarnil did. He shook his head in bemusement. I have no intention of tormenting them, Petra. I shall enjoy the hot water more than anything else I imagine. She hugged him briefly, which he returned, before pulling back and stomping away in her usual manner. He shook his head and moved to catch up with Asarnil at the other end of the hangar, waiting with his arms crossed and tapping his foot. A hot bath and massage did sound rather nice, now that he was considering it. He used to have such back-on McCrags in his youth, and they were always pleasant experiences. He rolled his neck, hearing it pop in several places. A massage was probably called for, yes. Come now, slayer of evil. Our wicked vices shan't wait for us forever. The Dragon Lord called out from 100 feet away, drawing the attention of all the various eldar scattered about this section of the ship. The sooner we are nude, the sooner we can begin discussing our respective swords and how they might clash after the oils are applied. Guilliman let out a bark of laughter at that, matched by the equally amused look on Asarnil's face. Most of the nearby guards had expressions of exasperation or humor. Indeed, although your blade is quite larger than mine, I think we both agree that my thrusts are superior. He returned fire, causing Asarnil to snort in laughter as he caught up. I think our observers can be the judge of that, but first, the maids must wash and oil us. And the fruit and wines, of course. I'm offended that you'd think I would forget. Empire eventually came to an internal settlement in response to his offer and plans, and then reached out to begin negotiating the finer details of their alliance. After the alliance was settled, he handed over the examples of archaeotech that they had pilfered from various worlds thus far, and copies of Codex Administratum and Lingua. All such gifts were received with emotionless gratitude. In most respects, it was 4 smaller, more standard agreements wrapped into a package contract: a mutual military alliance, a trade agreement, a mutual research endeavor, and the establishment of a few basic agreements on matters of statewide policy. The sovereign worlds of Griffon would remain technically independent, providing the industry and engineering expertise that his armies and eventual empire would need, and they would educate an engineering corps on the most basic foundations of engineering and the sciences, provided that this corps recite the appropriate litanies as policy and have at least one Griffon tech priest on hand for more complex matters. They would also send military aid, primarily in the form of Titan detachments, and aid in establishing the various industrial requirements of developing worlds. Regular quotas of supplies would be extracted from his worlds and delivered to theirs, and regular quotas of guns, vehicles, and ships would be flown from their worlds to his. In exchange, they would have a retinue of eldar subject matter experts aiding them in understanding the webway gates and wraithbone as a material, as well as producing the plates for the first wave of wraithbone armored titans. They would not attempt to restrict the eldar from using their technologies, but would have the right to oversee and veto uses of xenotech for his human and abhuman soldiers and citizens. They cited risks of spiritual decay as the primary cause, but Guilliman knew the move was mostly political in nature. They were attempting to get on the alliance with permissive terms to regulate the new empire that would form as best they could. Naturally, Guilliman agreed to this on the sub-condition that the rights and permissions of the alliance would be reviewed and potentially revised by a meeting of both parties once every 100 years. They, naturally wanting to leave themselves open to gaining more influence later, agreed to this term. Guilliman asked for initial approvals for what Wraithbone would be used for, and they agreed to permit the material for simple weapons, no moving parts or energetically active components, and armor unpowered. The review of other potential technologies was to be performed once they had a deeper understanding of the material. Other, smaller agreements and settlements on specifics were made throughout the entirety of the contract, the end result being a 144-page document that would be referenced in the so-called Charter of Ziz. Ziz being the name of the mountain that used to sit on the now stone plain that their first meeting was held upon. The last order of business was him making the more personal request of a tutor for engineering and sciences for his sister, something that he could tell somewhat surprised the tech priests. Likely wishing to gain political capital and favor with a potentially important figure in the burgeoning empire, they agreed simply enough, again, on the condition that she not teach others what they called the deeper mysteries. This request was combined with the emissary subclause, and the group of tech priests assigned to represent Griffon and its interest in Guilliman's retinue would have Petra's education as another duty. You did not exaggerate, Malum Kaito. She learns at a rate comparable to the uppermost ends of the Griffon standard distributions of intellect. A prodigious intelligence. The almost mechanical voice sounded out from behind a half-closed helm that resembled the head of a bird of prey. The lower mouth was visible, revealing a finely maintained and short-cut beard, but the neck and upper head were hidden behind plates of powered armor. The throat was lined with seams, evidence of past augmentation, but otherwise looked as a standard human's might. The lower jaw of the helm was loose, currently hanging around the collar and ready to be retracted up to protect the wearer. The eagle helm's visor was a dark gold, behind which glowed the constant scroll of data lines and targeting system circles. The cuirass was plated with the symbol of Griffon, the cog-winged eagle, and incorporated a greatcoat for additional protection. The power armor itself was relatively thin plates painted light gray, with yellow shoulders and gold highlights. By the side of the man was a cog poleaxe, which was attached to some kind of electrifying component, and a heavy shield with another technical component in its interior. Guilliman recognized the thin plate of technology on his upper back, which indicated the presence of a refractor field, a type of energy shield that helped to protect the wearer. At the man's waist was a plasma pistol, a powerful if finicky weapon that required regular maintenance and careful usage to prevent fatal self-detonation. All in all, it was not the more willowy and inhuman magos that Guilliman had been expecting they assigned to him. It was, indeed, a magos, as he had been told. Reflecting their more martial culture, perhaps, the tech priests of Griffon apparently spent the first portion of their careers as members of their dedicated military forces, and then studied as magi after a set period. This allowed them to field much more troops in times of emergency, as all of their priests were also former soldiers ready for activation. Not Magos Dominus, who served as dedicated commanders for Forge world military affairs, but each and every priest also being trained in war arts allowed them to draw out immense armies when the situation demanded it, at the cost of less overall members of the actual priesthood due to deaths in military service. Knowing the politicking that went on within such organizations, Guilliman figured they considered that a boon. Okay, no. This was not the appearance of a standard tech priest magos. This was the appearance of a secretary, axiarch, a Titan Guard commander, one that just so happened to study as a magos as well, the only real evidence of this coming from the two mechadendrites that extended from the shoulders and hung low to the ground. She's a very bright young girl. Shame that she's bound to such a foolish older brother, is that right? Asunil jested on the other side of the table they were seated at on the bridge, an easy grin on his face as he swirled his cup of wine. Her foolish older brother who lusts after my servants with perverse and groping hands. I'll ask you to not accuse me of your own nature. Guilliman jabbed back, with his own cup tilting in Asunil's direction. How much work has Briaka actually managed to perform recently with you hounding her so? Lies fall so smoothly from your forked tongue. Dear Muriel has been practically chained to your chambers for years now, serving you hand and foot and likely mouth. Fetching me more paper and ink, you mean? He let Asarniel feel the full wrath of his unimpressed expression. He most certainly did not have time for romance when the fate of the galaxy was at stake. He had work to do. I was not aware of Malam Kaido's true nature. I shall request that you limit your perversions to the Xenos and spare my retinue your lustful intent. The Titan Guard commander spoke, interrupting the normal flow of conversation. Of course, if such is required for our alliance to proceed smoothly, they will be willing to perform their duties to Griffon. Guilliman let his face turn to stare at the utterly emotionless Magos as Asarniel broke out into a burst of coughing laughter, almost spilling his drink. Guilliman leaned back and spoke to the ceiling. I am fighting a war on two fronts, a state reserved for foolish and ill-prepared commanders. What series of tactical failures led me to this, I wonder? Magos Carl Calculatus, let it be known that you have the Dragon Lord of Charnak's current favor. Asarniel decided to encourage his newfound ally, proving himself a traitor of the highest order. I am pleased. My diplomatic procedurals are serving me well. The barest hint of humor finally leaked into the almost synthetic voice of the Fabricator General's son and Guilliman's current emissary to Griffon. Such an individual in this role proved that the tech priests were taking the alliance quite seriously. Only a shame that he was now outnumbered in the field. I am glad to hear that Petra is doing well in her studies. I had been worried that her blunt mannerisms would cause offense. Guilliman shifted the course of the conversation in a very obvious manner, causing Asarniel to smile bemusedly at him. On the contrary, she speaks in an efficient and concise manner. Carl replied, letting one of his mechadendrites gently dip into the glass of his own wine, likely analyzing the chemical makeup before risking a drink. This beverage contains psychoactive glucose. It's called ambrosia, simply a form of psychically infused wine. It fortifies the health of those who partake in it. Asarniel explained, downing the rest of his glass. Fortunately, it's not urbanite wines. Those contain poisons that require active biomantic breakdown to enjoy as intended, which would probably be unpleasant for most to indulge in. Carl risked a small taste, swirling the drink around his mouth for a moment, likely running it through another chemical analyzer, before finally swallowing. Acceptable. He finally spoke, high praise from a tech priest. Asarniel was about to reply, before a call from the front of the bridge sounded out. My lords, we are approaching the end of the Webway Gate. Ah, excellent. Asarniel spoke as he rose from his seated position, smiling at the bridge pseudo-windows. Around them, the labyrinthine walls of the Webway gradually twisted into patterns slightly more familiar to Guilliman, a sight he witnessed 5 years ago. He himself stood, walking forwards to the balcony of the ship and crossing his arms. Magos Calculatus, soon you shall see the verdant beauty of my homeworld, and the preparations for our jolly conquest can begin. I am ready to commit the site to memory, Dragon Lord of Charnak. The man said as he walked forwards to stand next to Guilliman and Asarniel. Maid, please go find the other godlings and tell them we are soon to arrive. I'm certain they'd like to witness my turquoise crown jewel. Asarniel commanded in Eldari without looking behind him. At once, Dragon Lord. The red-haired maid called out, before turning quickly to do as she was commanded. After the door behind her closed, Carl commented again in his buzzing high Gothic. I have reviewed the lexicon and guide provided by Malum Cayedo. Your language is comprehensive. To this, Sarnil nodded casually. Eldari was designed for poetry first, and natural communication second, according to legend. With psychic communications being so instinctive to my people, our language is reserved mostly for demonstrating one's ability to use metaphor and symbolism. Intriguing. Yes, with psychic development a default amongst your kind, the need for verbal communication would be a secondary development. Language evolving, ever-increasing complexity at the cost of usability would not be a hindrance in such conditions. Carl mused aloud. It shall take time to master. Perhaps the development of a simplified variant should be considered? Guilliman added to the conversation. The need to communicate with those that don't have the same time to learn will be a limiting factor in expansion and education. My kin will not appreciate that. Many among the Eldari are quite proud of how inaccessible the language is to outsiders. It's common to consider it the language of civilization, and thus any incapable of it are not civilized creatures. An understandable sentiment. The priesthood considers binaric cant in a similar regard. The conversation continued in that manner for some time as the ship approached the mammothine pillars that supported the local webway gate of Charnak, immense structures large enough for anything short of an imperial battleship to move through unhindered, likely sung into existence long before any living memory could recall. Soon enough, his sisters had arrived onto the bridge with curiosity in their eyes, and along with them several dozen Eldar from around the ship, officers and directors of certain facilities, all eager to finally return home, even if only briefly. Soon, the webway gates in front of their ship swirled to life, and Charnak's pride sailed through, ready to look upon its home once again. Guilliman felt his body tense at what they saw after exiting the portal. Sarnil went silent, and his ears shot up in alert. Carl went completely still. The girls gasped. More Eldar ships than Guilliman had ever seen in one place before in his life. Possibly more Eldar ships than Guilliman has ever seen before at all. Tens of thousands of them surrounding Charnak as if a swarm of white insects. Most of them were small, as he was used to seeing. Battleships, cruisers, escorts, filling the void around Charnak as far as he could see, extending outwards like a perfectly coordinated parade march. And one ship in particular, directly over Charnak and closest to it, smaller than a craft world, which were the scale of small planets, but larger than any other Eldar ship Guilliman had ever seen. Stretched out like an immense wyvern, bristling with guns he could see from here, and swarming in smaller attack craft. 70,000 vessels larger than fighter craft, 1.7% margin of error. Carl spoke out, staring at the fleet in Charnak's system in gold visor glowing. You did not inform us that you had a fleet of such scale, Malum Kaido. I did not expect this, Guilliman replied, mind racing through the possibilities. He had been expecting some Eldar ships to be waiting for them upon return to Charnak, but no more than perhaps 1,000. 70,000 was well beyond anything in his predictions. 7 Eldari fleets worth of ships, and 1 capital-class vessel over my world. His ears twitched in agitation. Hey. Asunil. Guilliman spoke, suddenly becoming aware of something. Yes, son of man. His voice was tense. I may need to redraft my plans again. Sarnil's shoulders slumped with a long sigh. Dragon Lord. His face was lined with stress-induced grooves, and his hair was slightly frazzled. Surrounding him were equally exhausted-looking guards, who occasionally misstepped slightly. Thank gods you've returned. Savan, these Eldari, who are they? Surely not all of them are Exodites. The Sarnil dismissed with standard protocol, moving quickly across the patio, followed by Guilliman and the escort of Stormcloaks. The rest of their members were left back on the ship, mostly as a safety measure, and also so they'd stay out of their way when dealing with this affair. Not all of them, no. But all of them arrived, declaring the desire for a formal moot on Charnak. Look, there to the west. Sarnil and Guilliman turned their heads. To what Guilliman remembered was once a mountain, there was a mountain-sized structure there instead. An immense castle of wraithbone that gleamed handsomely upon a foundation of bald mountain rock. When they started arriving en masse, more and more rooms had to be built until we simply couldn't keep up. I ended up having to simply commission a keep constructed to house them all, using every bone singer and architect they brought with them as a labor force. Then they kept arriving. The Eldar let out brief murmurs of surprise and apprehension. The past 5 years of their voyage had two primary objectives: retrieve a number of his siblings and alert every Exodite world they came across to the current status of Isha, and their plans to found an empire to build the army to rescue her. Sub-objectives such as checking his information about the state of the galaxy and spreading the message of the oncoming emperor and distributing his tomes on effective governance were also performed, but they were not critical to what they saw waiting for them, suspended over and around Charnak. Savan sounded on verge of collapse and hysterics. This isn't an urban world. It's not designed to house millions of Eldar guests. Why didn't you make them stay on the ships? Sarnil threw up his hands in bafflement. You know how the rights of guesthood operate. Savan shot back, jabbing a finger into the Dragon Lord's chest. The world spirit will only shield them if they're guests on our soil. Do you want a demonic invasion? Aye. He turned around again and asked, They brought food as guest gift. Please tell me this. Most, not all. Guilliman put a hand on Asarnil's shoulder. Asarnil froze before taking a deep breath and forcibly calming himself again. Pushing the hand off his shoulder, Asarnil spoke with the cold tone Guilliman was used to from the Eldar. Thank you, Robut, Savan. Let us go see these guests. That isn't all. Savan spoke, voice harsh with overuse. A man forced to do too much for too long. Asarnil turned his head slowly and looked at Savan. What else, World Singer? The capital ship. It brought someone with higher authority than we. Asarnil paused, brows furrowing as he puzzled that. Guilliman was confused as well, baffled by who could be considered higher than a sovereign on his own world. Who? The Dragon Lord asked. I apologize for the overabundance of guests upon your world, Dragon Lord of Charnak. A powerful voice called out from the doorway that led into the World Tree's depths. I took measures to relieve your planet with my personal supplies, but even they were not fully sufficient. Savan turned with a head bowed low. Asarnil turned with brows narrowed and face cold. Guilliman turned with careful optimism given the words. An Eldar standing 9 feet in height was approaching them with measured steps. Plates of bone mail covered by a tabard of green and blue. Upon this tabard was the symbol of a golden tree, upon which 5 white stars hung. His build was powerful, his shoulders broad, his jaw strong, his features fair. His hair was black, hanging down to his waist, bangs held back by a thin silver crown of intertwined antlers that 3 soul stones were mounted upon. Swirling green eyes met the 3 of them and nodded in consideration. Allow me to introduce myself in the proper manner, as a guest upon your world. The massive Eldar spoke, inclining his head towards Asarnil, who stood as tall and still as a statue. I am Malekith Malorn, 4000th, 458th of my name, commander of the capital class ship, Seraphon. I would ask for the rights and responsibilities as a guest of Charnak, should you permit it. Asanil was silent for a long time before muttering out something at last. The Lord Commander of the Exodus Fleet. Malekith smiled gently and nodded. My legend precedes me, I'm afraid. Yes, you shall have the rights and responsibilities of a guest, Malekith Malorn. Asarnil couldn't drag his eyes away from the newcomer, who in turn turned towards Guilliman and regarded him with a curious eye. Bane of despair, last son of a doomed cycle, conquering godling. I have given myself no such titles, Guilliman responded. Malekith smiled and replied, and yet they are all true. I am pleased to meet you at last. I believe there is much to discuss before, during, and after the moot. Malekith demonstrated little shame in the declaration. I will have to spill much ink rewriting all my plans. I expected far fewer ships than this. We have much work before us regardless. Ink spilled is blood saved. This is true. Guilliman found himself optimistic of this newcomer. Asarnil and Savan stared at the two of them with blank faces and wide eyes.